this project was intended to build on those markets. So we took those 13 markets that came out of that study, and this study is all around providing an in-depth understanding of consumption. So the Deloitte work very much used factors around trade and industry dynamics and economic factors. This is all around consumption predominantly. And this was to identify export growth opportunities for the commodities of interest. So many of you might have seen the Deloitte report. There's an example on the right, but initially it identified 12 markets, and India was added later on because it was seen that although it came number 17 out of the markets that were in the study, it was felt that India did represent a decent growth opportunity, and certainly that's what we found. So it was very prescient for that and to be included. But it's worth noting that you can go back and see how these markets were selected, but we've used data, the important data from here. So as a jumping off point, you can assume that those 13 markets had some robust analysis behind them. We've used the key data points in this report to build on that. So just for your information. So in terms of the central question, we always use these as a North Star for the project. And the one here was, how can Australian horticultural industries unlock growth by generating consumer demand for different categories across different international markets for today and tomorrow? I think that last word, tomorrow, is key here because this was very much around what the future might look like. And you'll notice in here that it doesn't include China because the idea was that it was Australian horticultural industries looking for growth outside China into the future. So please bear that in mind as we go through. So the objective of the study, as I said, was to provide a consumer-led perspective on the opportunities. And what it does is it unpicks consumers' attitudes and values, as well as their fresh produce shopping behaviour, how they consume fruits, vegetables and nuts across the 13 markets. It provides a strategic lens on which markets represent the most attractive opportunity for each of the priority commodities. So you'll see how we give those recommendations through the study. Plus, we identify which commodities have the strongest right to play in each market. So this was really all about optimising export and product positioning today and into the future in order to drive growth against the prioritised industries, but facilitating really effective and coordinated trade marketing resources. So it's about optimising that investment. So just briefly on the process, it was a 4-step process. We started with an audit and discovery. So that was using all the data that we had at our disposal, including the Deloitte report. Then we entered in this localise and enrich phase, which was predominantly expert interviews with people in market to really help us understand the dynamics of trade in those markets. And it really went to inform the third phase of work, which was around developing the growth plan, which was the largest part of this study, which was large sample survey across the markets. We did 4,000 consumers across most markets where possible, and we asked them about 2 consumption occasions. So that's 8,000 consumption occasions per market mostly. Places like Qatar, where it's not possible to get that, I think we got 500 there. But mostly this is a very, very large study. The beauty of that is that we had lots of data to play with, and also we could compare it across markets. So that's really enabled us to do the analysis that you'll see some of today. And then the 4th phase is that align and embed, and this is part of that, which is socialising it around the key stakeholders and cross industries. So just a reminder of the markets in the study. You'll note China's not there, but it was USA, UK, Singapore, India, Japan, Hong Kong, South Korea, Malaysia, UAE, Qatar, Taiwan, Vietnam, and Indonesia. And here are all of the commodities, but as I said, today we'll be focusing on the key ones that are on this call. And just a bit of a note around the structure of these reports. It was felt that there's 2,000 plus pages of reporting here, so we had to kind of structure it in a way that was helpful. So at the very high level, there are 3 key category reports: fruit, vegetable, and then nuts and dried fruit. So these 3 documents are the starting point, and within each of these, you can go in and find your commodity of interest where it's relevant. So that's the first thing to note. Incidentally, we also have market reports on each of the 13 geographies. So there's lots more detail in there around what's going on and how do consumers look in those markets. And we've used the data across the other 12 markets as a comparison point. So that's for your information. So the idea is that these will be the starting point at the high level. Then you go to your commodity. The commodity sections would then identify where we think the biggest growth opportunities are. And then if you're interested in going into more detail in a particular market, you can go to the market reports. So the next section is around the market prioritization. So I'm going to talk you through the method here because it really helps to understand how we came up with these conclusions. So, and I know that there's been quite a bit of debate about this. So I think it's important to understand the metrics and the weighting and why we constructed it this way to just fill you in about how we got to where we got to. So from a consumer perspective, the strategic objective to determine which markets represent the strongest growth opportunities for Australian exports. And this analysis, while it provides a predominantly consumer lens, we also cover factors like supply chain, regulatory environment, trade, existing trade, etc. So you'll see how we've baked that into the analysis. So to identify priorities, we do that using two axes. So one is attractiveness, and that is how attractive is the consumer opportunity in a particular market for a commodity. That's the first dimension. The second dimension is addressability, which is how addressable is the consumer opportunity for a market or for a commodity. That's really how easy or hard is it to go after. So the first one's about how big is the opportunity and how attractive is it. The second one is around how easy can we go after it. So in terms of attractiveness, that has three key variables that go into that. The first one is penetration. So, what's the size? How often do people consume the commodity? And that's weighted 30% out of 100. The second one is the likelihood to pay premium, which is around that. How willing would you be to pay for a premium quality commodity? That the weighting there is actually 40%. It should be there. And then the final one is market access attractiveness, and that's a further 30%. So those three add up to 100. I'll show you the market access one in a bit more detail because that's the information that came from the Deloitte report. So market access attractiveness, which represents 30% of that calculation, was based on three variables. The first one was import dependency, and that was based on data around things like 3-year average value of imports, consumption share of production, 10-year change in value of imports. So the higher the values there indicates greater reliance on imports and for sustained growth. The second dimension there is future economic prospects. So this is things like the level change in GDP per capita between 2020 and 2030. So you can see the future view there. The level of change in urban population between 2020 and 2030. So high values there demonstrate larger and higher income markets. And finally, preference advantage. So this was around things like the quality of demand, according to the World Economic Forum. Do horticultural inputs align with our exports? And is the country in the Northern Hemisphere? Obviously, seasonality and distance was a thing there. So high rankings demonstrate a greater potential for Australian horticulture to differentiate itself in a particular market. So that's attractiveness. Secondly, addressability, and this also had three key metrics. The first one was likelihood to purchase Australian. So this is where whether there was a halo at Australian effect that would make it more appealing for Australian produce in a particular market, and that's weighted 30%. The second one there is ability to command a premium for that particular commodity. So price premium is important because this project was all about where we can find profitable growth, not just about volume. So ability to command a premium was a 40% weighting here. And then market access around addressability was another 30%. And that included two factors that was from the Deloitte work. The first one was around ease of trade and country risk. And that included data like foreign competition from the World Economic Forum, existence of free trade agreements or in negotiation, World Bank political stability and dispute status. So high ranking scores here indicated lower cost of doing business and reduced risk of market disruption from political factors in a market. The second factor there is value chain competitiveness, and this was things like relative distance to market. Obviously, the further away, the more costly and less addressable. Closer, much more addressable. Other thing was Port Transport Infrastructure Index, according to the World Economic Forum, and Australian export-import prices relative to the country average. So higher rankings demonstrated greater potential for Australian horticulture to differentiate itself in this market for accessibility or addressability. So when we bring these two things together, we come up with a matrix that looks like this. And the way to read this is that it's not surprising that where a commodity or a market is attractive and addressable, then that would be a strategic priority. And this is that it has strong overall consumer export opportunities. So those are the markets that end up in the top right. Staying on the right side of this this chart for a minute, where things are highly addressable and that they're easy to go after relative, but not as attractive, we would call them low-hanging fruit. So they're easier to get, and then you might go after them in the short term, might be lower cost to go after. It's just that they don't represent an as attractive opportunity as those strategic priorities. So they're the low-hanging fruit. If we look at the top left for a minute, where things become a bit harder to go after, but where they're very attractive, this represents a longer-term play. So things in that quadrant, it might be that the potential investment is higher, it might take longer, you might not get the same return, but they're still quite juicy opportunities, so they're worth thinking about in the longer term. So any market that lands there, that's a longer term play. And then finally, based on this data, and remember, these are all relative terms, so that's really important to understand. These are relative to the other markets in the study, noting that the 13 markets were all identified previously as being potentially attractive and priority markets. So low priority is where relative to the other markets, it represents less attractive and it's less addressable. So it's that relativity that's important. So all of these markets are potential, as identified in the original study. What we did here was look at the consumer lens with some other important factors, and we looked at relatively, when you're looking for future growth opportunities, where might you get the biggest bang for buck? And so anything that ends up in the top right is where, relative to the other markets, we think is a strategic priority, and that's what the data is here to show. So there were four, when we originally presented this to some of the early markets, there was lots of questions around these four elements. So what we felt we'd do is put these in as a bit of a, keep these in mind while you're reading this data, and I'll take you through each one. And they were, first of all, around technical market access. The second one was markets with existing trade. The third one is the premium opportunity, and the fourth one is the focus of investment. So let me explain what that means. So the first one is existing technical market access for a commodity was intentionally not included in the valuation of addressability. And the reason for that was that this project was designed to identify attractive and addressable future growth geographies. Therefore, we didn't want to be restricted by current arrangements. So this research is intended to support and inform industry decisions regarding the progress of any potential future or ongoing market access or market improvement requests. So I hope that makes sense. So the second one is, while the calculation includes data on general market access, it intentionally does not include whether Australia currently trades in a particular commodity. And the reason for that is the goal of the analysis was to provide an objective assessment of whether a market is attractive or addressable, independent of current arrangements. So if a market that we're currently trading in for a particular commodity is shown not to be a strategic priority, this does not mean that we should consider withdrawing from this market. So please keep that in mind. However, what this data would suggest is that we would recommend re-evaluating the relative focus of investment in this market and consider other markets when looking for future growth opportunities. So if you see an existing market that you've been focusing on that might be in the low priority bucket, it's not to say get out of it or slow down. It's just to say that compared to some of the other markets, what this data says is that you might be better off looking for future growth opportunities in other markets. That's how to read the report. The third one was around the premium opportunity. And in evaluating attractiveness and addressability, we have intentionally used data that shows where premium opportunities can be found. And the reason for this was that the objective of the project was to identify profitable growth opportunities for commodities into the future. So where Australian commodities have more chance of growing profitably, they're a better chance of commanding a price premium. So this was around premium, not just about volume. So high commodity penetration in a market has been used to evaluate attractiveness. You'll see that in a minute. But this analysis favours markets where there's a larger opportunity for Australian products to command a premium. And you saw that in the weighting on the previous thing. So price premium or commanding a premium has a high weight here. And that's because of that profitable future growth opportunity. And then finally, the evaluation and prioritisation of export markets into the 4 quadrants of attractiveness and addressability is intended to be only one input into decision making about where to focus investment. And the reason for that is that the objective of this project was to primarily offer a consumer lens into commodity consumption, which we identified was really a big missing piece for lots of the industries. And this is to enable export decisions that are informed by more robust consumer data. So while we still include additional market factor data from previous Deloitte analysis, we didn't include everything, which is impossible. So export decisions should be made using all available information, including the economics of local growers and exports, and this report should form one important input into that decision. So I understand that, and we've had conversations with different industry bodies where some of the data has put markets in quadrants that they themselves didn't think was correct, and they've used other data to make an informed decision based on all of this data plus other data that you have. So we encourage that. This is not meant to be all-encompassing, but we hope that this large sample survey across all of these markets does provide an important input into any future decisions that you make. Noting that this is all about the future as well, as we just talked about. So please consider this as one important input into future investment decisions based on where you might get premium opportunities, not just volume. Well, I might just pause there before I start revealing some of the outputs and talking them through, just to see if there's any questions or comments at this point. And if not, I'll carry on. And if you want me to clarify anything, I'm happy to do so. And once again, to Jay's point, please feel free to stop me at any time, put your hand up or just call out and I can slow down. Jonathan, yes.
Thanks, Patrick. I find it interesting in your opening slides how you didn't look at current market access in terms of, I guess, where products are already going, and I raise that because the two opportunities that we'll get into when you get into melons later on are already markets that we export to.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think there would have been. It would have been good to have some sort of involvement during the development of this, because I think it's for us in particular, it's kind of missed the mark, and it doesn't really align with our own export strategy that we only finalised at the end of last year. And so it's sort of, we've now got two competing documents that suggest completely different things, unfortunately.
Well, Jonathan, we'll get to that. Look, just as a bit of a background, and apologies if you weren't enough represented, but there was a PRG committee that was set up that helped guide this research as well as Hort. So it wasn't just us in a vacuum. And maybe when we get to the melon presentation, we can talk through some of your perspectives, because there's lots of data here that we've used to come up with these results. And I'm really keen to hear your perspective using other data sources. So maybe by putting those two things together, we can come up with a result that does make more sense for your industry. But certainly most of the industries that we've presented to so far, this has been helpful. There's often been a couple of markets where some people think, oh, I'm not so sure. But anyway, when we get to the melon one, should we have a bit of a chat in more detail about the data, and let's see how we can align. And I'll explain why this data would suggest what we put forward. So I know there's a lot to get through today, so I hope you can be patient for everyone on the line. But thanks for your question, Jonathan. Any other questions at this point? So we'll carry on with lychees, and really this is the answer. So what the data tells us is that when we throw them all in the pot, and I will once again reiterate, these are all relative. So top 13 markets as represented as good export opportunities. You have to then pull them apart using the data that we've got to hand, and that's how this was done. So what this tells us is that Indonesia, UAE, India, and Vietnam would give you biggest bang for buck when it comes to lychees. The USA, pretty big. In fact, it's the #1 most attractive. But just in that long-term play on the cusp there, the reason for that, and I don't know exactly what the data is, but usually that USA, it's the tariffs, distance, and also the strength of local market, and also competition from surrounding countries like Canada and South America. That generally makes the USA harder to go after, but it certainly represents a very attractive opportunity. The dynamics here too is that you've got Taiwan, Korea, Japan, UK quite low. UK we see quite a lot is quite low, based on their unwillingness to pay a premium, the distance to market. They're used to getting everything fresh all year round at a pretty good price. Taiwan, Korea, Japan tend to be lower priorities for lots of commodities, given that the more developed countries in Asia have there's less of an Australian halo compared to some of the other more developing Asian countries, like Indonesia and India, Vietnam. They consider Australia to be quite clean and green. Australian commodities are highly sought after in those geographies, and people are willing to pay a premium for it. So without going through all the detail, because I know we're pushed for time, I might just take any questions from any representatives from Lychees to see if this makes sense and if there's anything here that surprises you before I crack on, talk you through how you might read the data here. Any questions from the Lychee team?
Patrick, it's Jill here, Jill Hauser.
Hi, Jill. How are you?
Hi, good, thanks. Well, the ones that are up there in the strategic priority, we already go to Indonesia, UAE, India and Vietnam. We don't have access there. But we've got a market access application in for Vietnam that's been there 3 years.
Right.
And we're putting one in for India. But I'm surprised that Singapore is down the left-hand side. Because they do pay premium.
Okay.
So yeah, that's a bit of a unusual
surprise.
It is a bit of a surprise, yes. Hong Kong, no, they used to be one of the better ones, but yeah, things changed about 3 or 4 years ago with Hong Kong, and that's when USA came in. But yeah, maybe Singapore is a bit of a question mark, and Indonesia. Even though lychees are exported there, they don't pay the money for them, high premium. Yeah.
Okay. So look, I've just gone out to look at some of the data behind the scenes, and what I can see is that Singapore, the consumption or the penetration is far less frequent than some of those other markets. So you can see that UAE, Indonesia consume twice as many lychees or as often. So that's a big driver of why it's not as attractive as some of those other markets. So that's one thing, Jill. Yep. So premiumness is slightly down compared to some of the others. So you can see USA, big premium market there, similarly with Indonesia and Vietnam. When it comes to addressability, it doesn't have the same Australian halo that some of those other markets have, as I mentioned. So you can see that people in Singapore are saying that likely to buy Australian, only 5% would say that, whereas 13% in India and Indonesia would say that. So that gives you a little bit of insight as to, and all this data is available, by the way. So I'm just sort of pointing out why Singapore, based on this data, would not end up in or ended up in that quadrant.
Yeah. Okay then.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'll just have to look through it again. The USA, what was the reason you said USA was the cliffhanger there at the time?
Yeah, so USA's got pretty good penetration. It's got very good premium. Market access is good, so very attractive. It's #1. Yeah. When it comes to addressability, though, the Australia is not seen as anything particularly special compared to the others. So might be that the local or more local lychees are good. So, USA is a very strong domestic production of many commodities. Things from Canada and South America, things like that, also are a big deal. The premiumness is good here, still with addressability. And then the market access addressability based on some of those Deloitte factors is very low or below average. So you can kind of see that addressability is on the cusp there based on the fact that market access addressability is low, and also that Australian halo is not particularly there.
Yeah, I'd say there's a few things wrong in that explanation, because lychees are only grown in a very small area in Florida, in the USA. Yep. There's none in Canada at all.
Yep.
Small market in Brazil, and Australian lychees are supplying USA at a time when there's nothing else available.
Okay.
South Africa comes on about now, November, December, and is usually finished when the Australian lychees are over there. So there's nothing else in competition when the Australian lychees arrive.
It's worth bearing in mind, Jill, and I think that's a very good point. This was really on the cusp. So, yes, with a breath, you could move it into a strategic priority, but it just kind of landed slightly left of that line. But I think it's definitely worth playing in. That would be what I would suggest here.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Thank you, Patrick.
So I just sort of showed you through a little bit of the data and how that plays out. So those calculations to put these bubbles in their place, you can use all the data in these decks to come up with that. So you've got the weightings and all the data, and if you'd like more questions, please reach out to Horde Innovation, and we're happy to deal with those directly if you have any questions. But once again today, feel free to ask me as we go. So the way we structured this report is originally, and I mentioned there was a PRG group that helped guide us in this delivery. And it was really because there was so much data, we had to kind of be choiceful about how we did it. So in the summarized report, we focused on the strategic priorities, but you can get data on all of the markets at some point in the report. But we had to sort of bite off a piece that was digestible, I suppose. So the remainder of this summary report ticks off those top priority commodities and literally just goes through them and picks out the key things. And this is also to cater for those of you who really just want to know the high notes and what's going on. These slides are designed to just kind of give you a basic rundown of what's important. So they're kind of structured in a way which is they've got the commodities there, and what are the implications, why are they attractive, and why are they addressable? That's this slide. I've gone through some of these, and this is all the data that goes into creating those calculations. So they're all there for you. I won't go through them in more detail now. But then these slides then take those 4 priorities and start to kind of give us a sense of, okay, where are these opportunities and how do we realize them? So this slide is really just a consumption snapshot. Thin on data, because we just want to be able to use the data to pull out the key insights here. So if we look at lychees across those 4 priority commodity or markets, snack and lunch, when, the how, fresh on its own. Also, Indonesia like to have them in smoothies, frappes as well. The why is important, and taste is a big one here. So taste and indulgence. So they're really seen as an indulgent fruit across most markets. And excuse me if I've just lost my screen there for a minute. Apologies for that. Sorry, guys. I'm just share my screen again. Okay, I'm back. So yeah. So I'm getting a request to reboot my computer, so sorry about that. So taste and indulgence are big ones. At home with family are the key things that people eat them. Then behind the scenes on those summary charts, you get lots of things like this. It's worth noting that we previously did a study in Australia, which was the prequel to this. And where the questions are the same, we've included that data as a bit of a benchmark so that you can see. So for example, in this chart, when did you consume? In Australia, 53% of people say they had them as a snack. But what's interesting is across those key priority markets, it's much more spread. And in fact, snacking for lychees in Vietnam is only 16%. It's predominantly for a dessert and also lunch in Vietnam. So these types of displays really trying to identify what are the key differences across markets, and it's designed to help inform how you might go and how consumers are using them differently across markets to help you with your export strategies if you choose to go after these markets. What kind of snack is it? We break that out a bit more here, and you can see that's quite snack between lunch and dinner is very common here across all markets and Australia. The how of consumption, fresh on its own, 50% in Australia almost, and Vietnam, but you can see that in places like Indonesia and India, it's much more spread, particularly this other 27%, and that includes things like as a topping on yogurt, as a garnish, cooked on its own as part of a drink, an alcohol cocktail, ingredients in baking for decoration. So there's lots more nuance or difference across markets. So yeah, the way people like lychees in all of these markets is very different. There are some similarities, of course, but it's the differences that I find most interesting. The where you were at home, quite significant there. UAE, a bit more out of home, you can see there. Where did you get it from? I purchased it myself, 50% across the board of all commodities, but in these priorities, much higher there. There's also some gifting, so 10% in India, 11% in Vietnam, so gifting of lychees for some proportion of the population. Who were you with? So you can see that in Australia, the breakdown of who you're with, 39% would say I was on my own. There's some family, and some parents and family groups, group of friends. But what's interesting here, and we find this across a lot of the different commodities, is that it's those family or those multi-generational family dynamics that represent much more group consumption here. Particularly Vietnam is really high there, 56% with a partner, 41% with a group, 39% with kids. So you can see there's lots more multi-generational consumption going on across these markets. So that can give us some insight into how we might market to these geographies. Then there's the why, and we did some work originally which identified a universal why, and so these 6 needs pillars. And what we found across the work is that they were the same across all markets. Some of the weighting was different, but really our people are people, and the why they consume things is the same no matter what country you're in. And as I said, some of the weightings are different, and I'll show you how they come out here. So these are the key why, and the why people pick up any dried fruits, vegetables or nuts. And fruits, sorry. So taste, quick and easy, so that convenience, healthy and nutritious, indulgence is a big one, physical and mental energy, and connection. It's fair to say that taste and quick and easy were very common across, and they're quite the largest needs that people had. And what we found was that the other 4, health and nutritious, indulgence, physical and mental energy, and connection, were the secondary needs that drove. So it tended to be a combination. It's not just one of these things that caused people to pick up a fruit, vegetable, dried nut, or dried fruit. So in the priority markets, it was the why, 63% for lychees taste. So that's very, very high. So really having a tasty lychee is important, and that's why people have lychees. Another almost 50% would say that it's indulgence that causes them to eat, or the results in them eating a lychee. And then convenience, quick and easy, also quite high. All of these scores are quite high compared to other commodities actually, but certainly that's taste and indulgence coming up really, really strongly there. And then when we break those down by market, you'll see these displays are also designed to get more data out of these out of the work. All of the market data is in the appendix, by the way. But this is just to have a look at the key priority markets. And what I always look for here are the profiles that look a little bit different, and these are quite similar actually for the why. But it's the indulgence that comes up very strongly, and number 1 in Indonesia and India for indulgence. And in Indonesia, taste is also a really big one, similar to Australia actually, 68 plays 67. Connection is quite big for some of these markets, much more compared to Australia, which is only 30%. But in India, it's 40%, Vietnam 44%, and Indonesia 43%. So much more connection is driving why people pick up lychee. And then we break those down even further, and you can kind of see what goes on in the detail there. And in Indonesia, the one that jumps out there is refreshing is number 1. 45% say that that's the most important reason when choosing to consume a lychee. So when we look at the more functional things, 32% would say refreshing taste, 29% sweet, and 27% fresh and light. So these are the more functional reasons why people pick up lychees in those priority markets. And then when we look at the markets side by side, you can see those profiles. And number one there, sweet, pretty high, refreshing taste, fresh and light. But down, it's you can see some of the differences coming through. So in India, rich in antioxidants is one that pops out. So the way I read these charts whenever I look at them is to look for the ones that over-index compared to the average, and that's a helpful way of understanding what are the differences between markets. Now it comes to the premium opportunity. So the top 4 reasons why people would buy a premium lychee is number one, fresher. 42% would pick fresher. 32% of people say sweeter, 26% more flavour, 26% safe and trusted. So they're the main reasons why people would pay a premium for lychee across the priority markets. And then when we look at that in more detail, you can see that the one that pops here most is that in Vietnam, more appetizing, not bruised or damaged, is really important in Vietnam, 36%. I wonder if that's a problem in Vietnam for lychees and the way they show up. So that starts to look like a job to be done if you're going after Vietnam as a market. They would also say lasting longer, 25% is important. And then when we look at the barriers, price, 23% of people say price, so a bit expensive. Bruising easily, 19%, and high in sugar, 17%. None of those are particularly high though. So 23% for expense is the highest one, but compared to some of the other commodities, what this suggests to me is that lychees are fairly well priced in most of these geographies. But when people are not picking up a lychee or they choose to go elsewhere, apple would be the first thing, banana also very high, and mango. They're the 3 primary commodities that they would choose if they're not having lychees. And then you can see how those play across the markets. Bruising easily, we saw that in the data just before. It's a big problem in Vietnam. 33% see that as a major reason or a major barrier. So that really is a job to be done in Vietnam if that's a market that you choose to go after. Quality is often poor in UAE, that spikes as well. And too expensive, you can see how that plays across. Not too expensive in Vietnam, actually. It's other things. It's 3 other factors that come up more highly there. Sugar, bruising easily, and it goes off too quickly in Vietnam. So you can see how Vietnam has a really different profile than the other markets. And then finally, there's this page which is really the overall summary for the work for lychees. So this really articulates the where to play and how to win, and there's no data on this page, and each of the commodities have one. So the way this works is the where to play is really, number one, focusing on the strategic priority markets. And this is about focusing on markets where consumers are willing to pay a premium for quality lychees. And that's in Indonesia, UAE, India, and Vietnam. And one could argue USA fits in here too. And that's about improving knowledge and appeal of Australian lychees in those markets, and that will drive incremental growth for Australian lychees. So then the how to win. So firstly, delivering the core needs, and that's around refreshing taste, indulgence, and good for sharing. And then some more functional things around sweet, fresh and light, quick and easy snack is good and is part of lunch or dessert. So they're kind of delivering those core needs is how to win. Then leveraging the premium advantage. So this is about maximising our opportunity to deliver lychees that are fresher, sweeter, have more flavour, and come from a safe and trusted source. And that's how you can sell more premium lychees in these geographies. And also about reducing those barriers. So being too expensive, and that's not just about reducing price, but it's about showing the consumer that the bit more that they're paying is worth it, and by reducing those or delivering those premium attributes is how you do that. Bruising easily, high in sugar, there are other things that we can reduce there, and this is if we can reduce those barriers, this minimises drift to other substitutes like apples, bananas and mangoes. So yeah, that's the final page for each of the commodities. So I might just pause there again and see if there's any questions or comments on that, whether that all makes sense. Yes, Jill, go ahead.
Yeah, on the for reduced consumption barriers,
yeah,
I think that should be, you've got citrus fruits are too expensive.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that needs to be fixed, but that's related to here. it is actually based on this data, actually. So,
Okay.
yeah. So you can see that too expensive comes up pretty high for all of those. The bruising easily and containing sugar, and it's really Vietnam and Indonesia that are driving that, particularly Vietnam. So, so actually, when you look at it in that regard, it's not as big a problem in India or UAE. So this is where you're looking at the different markets is very important, because if you're going after them, there's different things or different dynamics going on in the consumers in local markets. So, yeah, I would encourage you then to look, if you're choosing to go after one of these markets, to look at the market reports, and that's got lots more information about how those consumers in those markets differ. So those summary pages are really just about pulling it all together.
Well, I
But yeah.
suppose the results of India and Vietnam are possibly on their own fruit, aren't they? Because they're big producers of lychee.
Potentially, but what
Yeah.
these also say, yeah, so this is sort of saying why consumers generally would not pick up a lychee. And
Okay.
so, yeah, there'll be a mix of import and their own lychee too. That's right, Julia.
Well, they would only be, yeah, okay. No, that's fine.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's carry on to mangoes. So yeah, you can see the mango chart, very different in terms of the comparing it to the lychee, much more so going on in the top right-hand quadrant. And even the low-hanging fruit, Qatar just on the cusp there, and much less. USA not as attractive here. I think the USA has pretty good mangoes from local and also more regional imports too. So that's where the addressability comes down as well. But Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, UAE, the ones, India too, there coming up. So yeah, I might pause there again to see any representatives from Mango, whether this makes sense or there's anything here that surprises you, and I could possibly answer your questions if you have them.
It's Celine here from the Australian Mango Industry Association. I'm the Industry Development Officer. I think some of these countries are a little bit surprising, especially for the USA. There was just an article, I believe, published earlier today or yesterday about mango selling for about $14 a piece in the USA at the moment, Australian mangoes, which is really encouraging.
Right.
We're also, like recently, Japan removed their varietal restrictions. So I know it's a very tricky country to try to get into. However, there seem to be a bit of potential there, and it is moving forward. So overall, it's really interesting to see. I think some countries might be a bit more surprising than others.
Yep.
From our perspective, I may not be the best person to talk about all of this, but from what I've heard in my position, maybe a few surprises there. Yeah.
Okay, well, no, that's really interesting, actually. And I think pricing is an interesting one because of the fluctuation of it. This was a point in time, but indeed at the moment, there might be an opportunistic reason to go after the USA if it's available, given the pricing. But that can also come down. So that's something that I think the dynamics of the industry is worth keeping in mind. And the Japan data, once again, that was the other market that you were surprised by.
Yep.
I can see that penetration's much lower. In fact, it's the lowest according to this data, Celine. So that was a big reason why it's not seen as quite as attractive. And also the premiumness is lower. That's probably, so that just sort of brings that slightly down again. Market access is pretty good actually, so that it wasn't that. And when it comes to addressability, yeah, once again, across a lot of commodities, we see that Japan doesn't have that sort of, Australia doesn't have a halo in Japan compared to the other countries. I think it's fairly developed now, first world nation, whereas the developing countries really see that food safety is an issue, and Australia is seen as clean and green. So that comes through here in this data.
Okay, thank you.
But as before, where other data sources come to, if you've got those available, please use that to make these decisions. But really today I'm trying to explain how we use this data that we've got to hand. So hopefully you can put those data sets together and make the most informed decision that you can.
Absolutely, thank you.
Okay, and once again, just going through, I won't go through these in detail because these are really just about explaining how to read the data. So this is about just a very summary chart about why the strategic priorities are what they were. We've talked about those and how to read them, so please, you can do that at your leisure. Once again, I'll canter through these, but you can see that what jumps out here for me for mangoes is that taste and indulgence come out very strongly as the Y. Quick and easy in Vietnam and Indonesia also come up, and lots of those things are pretty familiar. Lunch snack, fresh on its own, at home with families coming out here. We've got some of these. Here's another chart that I didn't show you on the previous, but we did see the detailed data, and this is just a snapshot around what are the strategic imperatives. So the things like the functional stuff in summary here, sweet, refreshing taste, that's really what people are looking for. In Indonesia also, it's fresh and light. Something they're looking for functionally, but certainly delivering sweet and refreshing is what people want for in a mango. And then once it's fresher and sweeter is where you can get that premium opportunity, and ripeness is very important, or more important than other countries in Vietnam and Indonesia. Too expensive, a big barrier for India, Malaysia. Bruising easily in Vietnam. It's not just lychees that have a problem with bruising, or certainly Vietnamese consumers consider that to be a big deal. Other alternatives coming through for Indonesia, quality in UAE. Apples, bananas, across the board. UAE has a few different ones, fruiting vegetables, nuts and seeds. That's interesting. I always find the outliers interesting in these reports. And once again, we can see there's the Australian data on this page again. And once again, what's always interesting is how the markets differ from Australia. And I can see that it's Malaysia that looks far more spread across the day part when it comes to the when. What kind of snack, lunch and dinner, is very strong for most markets. The how, Indonesia and India looking much more spread in terms of how they use it, quite low or lower on fresh on its own. Part of a snack in a smoothie frappe is high for Indonesia. So that's an interesting way when it comes to how we might sell and consider marketing to these countries. The where you're at, pretty consistent, very high at home, some out of home. UAE, 32%. Where did you get them from? Purchased it myself mostly, but there's a little bit, they're less gifting than some of the other commodities here. Who are you with? We can see that multi-generational group dynamic going on. A lot more sharing going on in here too compared to some of the other commodities. Whereas once again, Australia is very high on our own. We do eat a lot on our own in Australia compared to these other geographies, which I always find interesting across this piece. And the Y, we've seen the Y, so let's see how it breaks down for mangoes. So yeah, taste really high again for mangoes, and indulgence similarly. So very close to the lychee, and that not surprising actually. Tasty indulgence is what people look for, and there's connection too. 36%, 1 in 3. When we look across the board, we can see that UAE spikes there a bit more from indulgence compared to others. Also in Malaysia, indulgence. So once again, won't go through all these in detail, but I always look for the spikes and what's different. And you know, this is what you will do when it comes to export. You'll look at how each of the commodities or each of the countries, what are the results for that country, and so looking into that can help us work out how to maximise the opportunity in these geographies. Once again, breaking that out in more detail, Indonesia has a spike in refreshing there. When it comes to functional stuff, we saw sweet, refreshing, taste, and fresh and light, the 3 top ones for the strategic priorities. And then for the detail there, all pretty similar actually, but Vietnam has quite a lot more going on than the others. That's the thing that jumps out here. Now, to take advantage of that premium opportunity, what people are looking for in the strategic priorities are fresher and sweeter, the top 2, but also free from pesticides, so organic 30%, important, and right state of ripeness is also important for premium. And that's how it rolls across the different geographies. Price, bruising easily and too messy. They're the top 3 barriers for mangoes. Once again, only about 1 in 5 would say those, so all pretty manageable, but nonetheless, that's what you really have to target to reduce those barriers. Bananas, apples, melons, the top 3 other things that people buy when they don't buy mangoes. And you can see how those reasons differ by market. Similarly to lychees, you can see Vietnam bruising easily 40%. You can see that's a number one problem there, number one barrier. So solving that in Vietnam would be the really way to leverage that or take advantage of the mango opportunity in Vietnam. And that's really what else people consider. So that's the detail around the barriers. So once again, the recommendation is around going after where there's that willingness to pay a premium in the where to play: Indonesia, Vietnam, UAE, Malaysia, India. So there's already high appeal for Australian mangoes in those geographies, but if we can improve the appeal in Malaysia, that can drive incremental growth in mango exports. Delivering the core needs, so we saw that refreshing, indulgence, good for sharing again, and that sweet, fresh, light, serving as a snack for lunch or dessert also comes up very highly. The premium opportunity for mangoes is around fresher, sweeter, organic is big too, and getting it in the right state of ripeness. And we saw that reducing those barriers around being expensive, bruising easily, and that notion that they're too messy can minimize drift to close substitutes like bananas, apples, and melons. So yeah, that's really that summary page, no data there. That's really the answer of all those slides that you've just seen. Any questions on that? Celine, does that make sense? Anyone else?
No question. It does make sense, especially the barriers to consumption did not come with any surprise. But yeah, it's all very interesting to see. Thank you.
Good. Okay, so we'll crack on now to melons. And yeah, so I think Jonathan, yeah, I'm happy to have a chat around these. And you can see how we've used the data and the weighting, and we're very keen to marry this with other data sources. So what we came up with, or certainly this data shows us, is that Indonesia, UAE are big opportunities, and probably not surprising that you're already there. You've already recognised that. What this tells us is that the consumer data that we gathered supports that view that you've gone after these already. Vietnam, Qatar also on the cusp there, so they might be interesting markets to look after, to go after, and Singapore in low-hanging fruit, so that might be another one that you may already be doing business with. Indonesia, Malaysia, once again, attractive actually, relatively attractive, and a little bit less addressable than those other markets on the right-hand side, but nonetheless worth going after. But Jonathan, if you've got any questions around those ones that ended up at the bottom left, happy to field those now, and I've got the data with me, so I can explain how we came up with this conclusion, and maybe we could put your data together with this.
Yeah, Patrick, so I guess Japan being at the bottom left is really concerning, given the fact that it is our single largest export market. We present an opportunity there, and the dollar value that suggests to me it should be the top right as opposed to the bottom left. Singapore is probably a bit lower than where I expected. It's our second largest market, and in terms of opportunity to pay a premium, take quantity, and what the offering there is, would suggest that it'd be a fair bit higher. South Korea being down in the bottom left concerns me, given it's from what our data says is the single largest consumption market for melons in the world. I'm a bit confused as to how it ends up so low on the left-hand side, but they're probably the key ones that raise questions, especially in terms of how that aligns with the data that we had. USA is not something we'd ever even consider, so I'd be saying I wouldn't even bother presenting it for melons, solely because the distance to market and the amount that they grow over there, it's not something we would even consider.
Okay, so let's tackle. I'll explain how Japan, Korea, and Singapore ended up where they did. So, based on this data, and this may be in conflict with yours, but our research data suggests that Japan, Korea, their consumption is a lot less than other markets. So that's the first point I'd make. Singapore is not bad actually, so that's a different one. That's pretty much in that pack up the top. The willingness to pay a premium. Now, the way this question asked might be different, and it might be that the pricing that you're getting is different to the way consumers perceive it. But certainly this data is suggesting that the premium or a premium above what they normally pay is not something that they would do. However, it might be that the landed price that you're getting is actually very, very good. So that's an additional data source that might then bump this up in your analysis. So
I guess that's where I'd flag that this question doesn't work for melons.
Yes.
So and the reason I say that, so the way that they produce them over in Japan and Korea is that they are growing one piece of fruit per vine, whereas in Australia we're producing 20 to 25, potentially even more pieces of fruit per vine. So we're actually filling the bigger end of scale in terms of consumption in Japan, but not targeting that premium price. They're selling an individual melon produced in Japan somewhere between 35 and 50 Australian dollars per melon. Whereas we're coming in and filling the everyday consumption. So from a consumption point of view, we're certainly well up on their own local produce, but we're not looking to be in there at a premium price.
So the economics for you not going after the premium opportunity still works, Jonathan? Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly how we've gone from 4 years ago, we were 450 tons into Japan. Last year, we were 4,600 tons. They're talking about that going up to about 9,500 tons over the next 2 to 3 years.
Look, what that tells me is that the fact that you're able to, garner quite a economically beneficial arrangement in Japan without going the premium opportunity is very promising, because what this would tell me, and the way I would read this, is that there's lots of other opportunity out here relative in Asia that you could also tap into. So compared to Japan, anything to the right, to the north and to the east represents a very good opportunity for you. So I guess the way I would encourage you to read this is, leverage the advantage that you've got in Japan right now. But if you're looking for export markets in the future, I'd encourage you to look to the top right, because there's a lot more to be had out there in terms of a premium opportunity for you. But it sounds like you're doing very well in Japan, and this is not saying you should stop at all. It's just saying that relative to other markets, for various reasons, Japan is not relatively as good. But so that therefore there's big future upside for you. So that's how I would encourage you to read this.
Yeah, I guess in terms of this being a strategic document, it's with Japan and Korea being down in that bottom left, it's not going to work for us. That's what I'd flag. That in terms of strategic priority, those two, obviously with Japan being our number one market and Korea being our number one target market, our competitiveness in Korea is extremely strong, is what we've found through the development of our export strategy. And as a market attractiveness, we had it well above that center line.
Okay. Well, what I'd suggest, maybe, Jade, we could sort of take that offline and look at how we can bring the two data sets together for those two markets. Mostly we found these to be, they have worked for most commodities in most markets, but there are indeed areas where, for various reasons, that you've got data that we didn't bake in here. So yeah, happy to take that offline if you like, Jonathan.
Yeah, look, and I guess one question I'd be interested in is, in terms of when you've got, in the next slides that start talking about some of the data, and when you break down some of the markets. Yep. So UAE and Indonesia, I am wondering whether there's the ability, or whether you've got the data to build in others. Because really, Indonesia, while we have market access, there's no, from what you've got in there in terms of the attractiveness and addressability, there's nothing there that screams to a melon grower that there's an opportunity there. Mm. And again, it's because we're producing melons. We produce a premium quality, but we produce based on quantity as a commodity, rather than focusing individual fruit to individual fruit. Yep. And so that's where I'd love to see Japan and Korea in particular built out within those within those in that one, just one up a bit. So in that strategic priorities, I'd just love to have them built in there as well, rather than just focusing on those two that we've already got access to, and UAE's already fairly well up there in terms of what we send across to there already.
Okay, so a couple of things. We can absolutely do that, and all the data exists, by the way, Jonathan. So all of the data that you can see here is available for every market. The weighting of the premium opportunity was very carefully constructed with the help of Hort and the PRG, who had input into that. So, we didn't come up with that once again in a vacuum. It was we went back and forwards on that quite a lot. But I think what you're saying is that there's a much bigger volume play that's very financially beneficial to you. So that has slightly different implications for you as a particular industry. So I think that's a different lens to bring to this analysis. So I think that's something that's worth recognising.
Yeah, so perfect. Thank you.
Once again, maybe it's worth taking offline and bringing that data, and it sounds like the commodity opportunity. So noting that the purpose of this study was really to show you where there are premium opportunities, and so that's why we weighted it as we have done. And I can see that those markets, because of that premium opportunity that's not there, these were heavily weighted down, and that's why they end up at the bottom there. So that's kind of the upshot of that choice.
And Patrick, can I just ask one more question? In terms of where you've got the consumption stats.
Which page?
So it's 299, a couple of slides on, I think. That one there.
This one, yeah.
So are they based on a percentage of people who responded, or are they aligned to per capita in terms of size of country versus how many people responded and then weighted accordingly?
Well, it was the markets where it's broadly nat rep, except for places like China, where it's tier 1, 2, 3 cities. Indonesia is a little bit the same, but from places like Japan, it's broadly nat rep. So they're saying that only 4% of people are saying that they consume melons once a week. That's how to read this. So it is per capita. It would be. So you can see that for other geographies, there's a lot more consumption going on.
Interesting, thanks.
And we factored some of these down based on real data too. So Okay, so look, Jonathan, do you want me to go through this, or would you prefer to look at the data separately for the markets that you care about? Maybe that might be a better use of time. What do you think?
I reckon let's, given the amount you've still got to get through, park the melon side of things, and we can have a discussion offline at a later date.
Yeah, I think that's right, because particularly the commodity opportunity you're talking about, it is a different dynamic to other commodities. So let's talk about that separately. All right.
Thanks,
John. I'll carry on then through here. Okay, so let's get to dried grapes. And you can see once again a different dynamic going on here with dried grapes. 5 commodities up there in the top. So India, UAE, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Taiwan pretty close to the cutoff there. USA also very attractive, but just on the left side of that addressability, as we've seen in other markets. Qatar, Singapore on the left side of that addressability line as well, that center point. And some of those other markets down the bottom for similar reasons, I would imagine, to the other commodities, where around consumption penetration, that premiumness, which is really important, as we've seen from melons, that was an important weighting in this analysis. So once again, I might pause here with dried grapes and see if there's anything here that surprises you or you'd like to comment, and I'm happy to take questions to field those to see if there's anything that gives an explanation as to why a market landed where it did. Nothing. So if it makes sense, I'll carry on, but please feel free to stop. Yep, that's the summary page. I won't go through those right now. I will focus on just some of the really key metrics here. Fresh on its own, part of a snack, taste, quick and easy, indulgence again, health and nutrition coming up for dried grapes. The premium opportunity is around fresh and high in vitamins and minerals comes up here more than the others that we've seen, and trusting in the safety. Premium packaging is also important in Indonesia. So that's something to bear in mind for that geography if you want to go after it. The when consumed, actually it's pretty similar to Australia actually. The one that stands out is India. Breakfast dried grapes, much more so in India than anywhere else. I'll just pick out the key things, so please stop me if you want to land on any of these slides. The multi-generational who with is coming through. When it comes to the why, this is always interesting. 53% say taste, 51% quick and easy, so really high, almost as equal. So it's convenience that's a big driver of the why for dried grapes. It's also an indulgence, but it's number 3 in this case. Then if we keep going to the more functional stuff, 27% sweet, refreshing taste, fresh and light are also important. I'll canter through the country stuff. When it comes to the premium opportunity for dried grapes, quite evenly split actually. It's about a third of people who tick fresh, high in vitamins and minerals comes up high here. Safe and trusted sources and organic is 27% as well. And when we look at the barriers, price is 25%, so 1 in 4. Too much sugar, 18% of people would say that, and there's also more exciting alternatives, 18%, but they're not too high compared to some of the other commodities. And when people aren't selecting those, they're having almonds, fresh grapes is another big one, and also other fresh fruit as well. I won't stop on there, and I'll carry on through unless there's any questions. I might just pause there. Are there any questions on dried grapes before I carry on? Just want to make sure that I get through everything today. No questions? Okay. So olives. So the olive prioritization matrix, India, Qatar, Indonesia, top there. But UAE, very big opportunity, and USA too, but only just to the left of that line. So, yeah, that's worth thinking about. Vietnam in the low-hanging fruit, but also very close to that line, and Malaysia around about the middle. You can see that Hong Kong, Korea, UK, Japan. So the other thing I might ask for around the olives is that we ended up splitting this into olives and olive oil. So if there's an appetite to go to the olive oil section first, or if you'd like me to go through olives, I will do. But please, if there's anyone from olive oil who'd like to make a comment or a question, I'm happy to field that now, and we could look at some of the data that went into this. So yeah, pausing here just once again to see if there's any surprises or any notes that anyone wants to make here.
Yes, hi Patrick, Michael Southern from the Australian Olive Association here. Hi. So when we're talking about olives, we're talking about table olives, I assume?
Yes, right. So we split out, there's a olive oil section too. So we asked people about the consumption of olive oil. So that's another completely different chart, yeah.
Look, certainly for us, olive oil is the biggest, by far the biggest product, and probably the only one really from an export perspective at this stage. But look, it doesn't surprise me that the USA and UAE are fairly big there. I would probably expect to see it to be a little bit different when we get to olive oil, but maybe we could quickly go through what you have there for table olives and then get into the olive oil.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just focus on those big insight slides, and then you can chew through the data when you get a chance, and then we'll get onto olive oil. How about that?
That'd be great. Thank you.
Let's do that. Okay, so firstly, when it comes to this page, I always look at the why. Tasty, indulgence, and connection. So health and nutrition also comes through, and Qatar, quick and easy. So there's a bit going on there for the why. When it comes to the premium opportunity, I always think that's a really interesting thing to look at. Fresh and safety in India. So yeah, food safety is a big issue in India, and that's what people are willing to pay a premium for. So, you know, the wealthy in India is a burgeoning segment, and even getting 1% of that market is huge. So yeah, there's opportunity there for that food safety. Organic comes through, premium packaging, another thing that's coming up there. Let's move through these, and I'll get to the why, because the universal why is taste again, 57%. And then indulgence, not as high as the others, but still 39%, that's pretty high. And then a third, connection. So yeah, that doesn't surprise me. It's something that you put out when you have guests, or you know, when you're with other people. Very common thing. So that's pretty intuitive. And then when it comes to the functional stuff, refreshing taste is what people look for. So taste again coming through strongly there. Light, mild, once again, all about taste. Low in calories, so people see it as a low in calorie thing to be eating. Premiumness, okay, so flavour is number one. So flavourful olive is what people are looking for, and yeah, that picture demonstrates kind of stuffed olives and the variations. I think that's kind of a thing for people. Fresher, another third. Premium packaging, 25%. So that's coming up here. So yeah, it's there's an opportunity there, or certainly when you look into the markets, there might be a premium packaging an important way to sell table olives, and food safety. It might be interesting just to pause there, because that's of interest to me. Premium packaging in Indonesia, it's number one, but also pretty important in Qatar. So it's number two in premium packaging, number two in Indonesia, but flavour in Qatar is number one by a long shot. So you can kind of see you really have to deliver that in Qatar to sell premium olives. Then when it comes to the barriers, not filling, yeah, I mean they're really a snack. So 22%. Price, that's not bad, 20%, and then other exciting alternatives, that's not bad either. So none of those barriers are too prohibitive, but nonetheless, they're there. And vegetables, the other things that people go for when they're going after it. So Michael, I could see you nodding. Sounds like a lot of that makes sense. Yeah, good. Okay, so let's get into olive oil, shall we? So here, right, yeah, very different. Taiwan, yeah, and for a lot of geographies, Taiwan didn't come up very strongly. So yeah, this is a quite unique, and maybe you've got some insight for us, Michael, on that as to why that might be. But Taiwan really high across the board. UAE, Qatar. But what's surprising here, or maybe not, you know, given the ubiquity of olive oil, is that there's so many markets to choose from, really. Even USA is, you know, that looks like it's number one in attractiveness, and it's not too far on the left of that. So, but the competitive dynamics, I imagine, would be more difficult in the USA, distance, etc. Tariffs is another thing that we see in the USA having a prohibitiveness on addressability. But certainly those green bubbles, even the olive-coloured green, are obviously the strategic priorities, but even those low-hanging fruit, there's obviously lots of opportunity for olive oil across Asia. And this is all very relative, because Japan, once again, it does get low, and you can see that it comes through from that Japan is so used to just paying a lot anyway, so their willingness to pay premium beyond what they can get is different, and also their consumption tends to be a bit more modest in terms of what they're claiming anyway. But nonetheless, all of these markets, you know, you would say are something to go after. But Michael, maybe you could have a comment on whether this surprises you or not. But there's certainly a lot to go after here.
Yeah, not really. Taiwan certainly is a market that I would expect to be up there. Probably not as far to the right as it is, but okay. China is certainly quite is an attractive market for a lot of exporters. Not that there are many olive oil exporters from Australia. It's interesting you talked about USA and the issue of tariffs there. Well, Cobram actually have got their own operation now in the US to counter that. So they're actually growing olives in the US and making olive oil there and using the Cobram brand.
Yeah.
So yeah, look, all of that's very interesting. And again, Japan, it is an opportunity, but a difficult one because being a premium market, they're very particular, and relationships are very important there. So you have to spend a long time to get in there. But having said that, we do have some growers who are successfully exporting into Japan as well. But there's a great range of opportunities there, so that's great.
Yeah. Okay. So look, once again, I'll go through the main headlines, and then maybe if we stop on where you want to look at particular markets. So let's carry on through. The first one that I find interesting is this one. So yeah, it's not surprising as an ingredient in cooking or in a salad. So yeah, certainly across those top three, that's there, and I'm sure if you look at the data across other markets, it'll come out very quickly. Quick and easy, health and nutrition, tasty, coming up strongly as why there. At home with family, that's not surprising. The premium opportunity, the Taiwan safety, actually, that's really interesting. That's for olive oil. So fresh, high in vitamins and minerals. So you can kind of see why people are paying a premium there. Fresher safety in UAE as well. Qatar safety too. So organic. So yeah, that's interesting that safety's coming up quite high. I wonder if there's been some food safety is an issue across Asia, but it does surprise me that places like Taiwan, UAE, that's coming up as a premium. Maybe that's what they're willing to pay for. Expensive is something that's coming up as a barrier, so we can get to that in more detail and see how that splits. Not surprising, sunflower oil, canola oil, some of the substitutes there as well. The when is mostly dinner. But in UAE, Qatar, a bit more spread actually. So yeah, different diets and different breakfasts that they might use that for. So you can see that's coming up quite different. And snacking, yeah, it's a bit spread there. Qatar particularly different. Snack between breakfast and lunch. Yeah, so much earlier in the day part in Qatar for the consumption of olive oil there. The how. Taiwan very strong in ingredient cooking, and then a lot more spread in the other geographies. So you can kind of see in the other down the bottom there, Michael, the types of things that people are using it for. So quite big there in UAE, Qatar for other things, and the variety of usages of olive oil. Pretty high at home, not surprising. Where did you get them from? Yeah, there's not much gifting going on there. More at restaurants too, particularly in Qatar. A lot of big eating out culture there. The family dynamic here, much more similar across the geographies than I think mainly due to the more developed nature of those priority. I imagine that would change when you look at the more detailed data in the appendix, that would spread, but certainly for these geographies, very similar. And then the why, right? The why here is taste, yes, number 53%, and quick and easy. So yeah, that convenient taste that you get. An indulgent for 28% as well in these strategic priorities. So there you go. Pretty similar profiles across markets, but healthy, nutritious coming up more so in Taiwan, and quick and easy in Taiwan too. So yeah, it's really seen as a healthy, nutritious thing there. Equal number one in Taiwan. And then when you break that out even more, yeah, see the Taiwan thing, to meet certain macronutritional needs, that's the second highest thing going on in Taiwan. So a really different profile there. And it does not require much thought. So yeah, there's a sense that olive oil can give them lots of the macronutritional needs without much thought. So it's doing a job already that they don't have to think about. So it's quite an interesting dynamic. Not common anywhere else by the looks of it. Then the more functional stuff to enhance the flavour of the dish. Once again, that makes a lot of sense. Adds texture to the dish and light mild taste. So that makes a lot of sense. Adding texture, once again, Taiwan coming out as a bit of an outlier there. So that's a really strong thing to drive there. So it adds to the texture, enhances the flavour. So very much around that cooking. So you can see Taiwan, the difference. Mild taste, that's really Qatar that's pulling that average up, but very high. That's the number one thing. So you can imagine selling in Qatar, you need something that's a lot milder and lighter compared to some of the other geographies. So yeah, gives you indication of what you need to do there. When it comes to premiumness, yeah, safety is number one. 1/3 of people in those geographies are fresh, high in vitamins and minerals, and comes from another country. So people like imported olive oil. I might look at the detail here. Yeah, so Taiwan, all pretty big actually. I trust its safety, and that's why people buy premium. So it's that imported safety thing. Fresher coming up pretty strongly, particularly in UAE.
Patrick, was that safety associated with Australian being the country of origin, or was it the product itself being olive oil?
No, this is just the olive oil, so it doesn't mean Australian in this question.
Right.
This is just any premium olive oil. What does that mean to you? And what it means is that I trust its safety. So it's been processed. It's in a bottle. You know, that's I think what they're saying when it comes to olive oil. Yeah.
Yep.
And then when we look at the barriers. Yeah, the price is a big one here, actually. So 35%, noting it's just these priority markets. It would be worth looking across all those markets, whether that's an issue. But yeah, certainly for these markets, 1 in 3 is saying that price is a thing. And then quality, too much packaging. They're not very high, actually, Michael. So, you know, 12 and 10, that's pretty low. So it's that perception of price. Once again, it's not about dropping the price. It's just making it so that people feel it's worth paying that extra for. That's really what that's all about. So it's getting that value equation right.
Patrick, it's worth just noting too that with the drought that's been going on in the Northern Hemisphere the last couple of years, that's pushed olive oil prices into world record levels. Right. So some of that's probably coming through here in the survey.
That rings true because I must admit it surprised me that price was a thing here, but there's something around the timing there because yeah, okay, very interesting. When we look at each of the markets, yeah, price is a big thing there across, and I think what you're saying is true there. It's coming through in this data, and there's how the substitutes fresh olives. And the other thing that spikes in UAE and Qatar too, so a lot more fresh olives going on, not in Taiwan though. And then that's really just a summary of what we've just seen. So, yeah, the final thing to sort of share with you, I guess, is that, and we talked about this with Melons and Michael with some of the other geographies here. All of this data is available in the appendix for every geography. So here are just some of the displays. And you can kind of see why we had to kind of slim it down because it was just very, very hard to digest when we originally did the work. So the PRG helped us kind of slim that down to just focus on some of the key priority markets, but you can get everything here that you need. Yeah, the other thing I would say, as I mentioned earlier, is that the market reports they have some different data cuts again, and there's a lot more about the consumer sentiment and attitudes to consumption and how they feel about food and health and all sorts of things. So the idea being that you would start with this report, you would see what's interesting relative to other markets and then delve into those market reports to get much better understanding of what to do if you're choosing to go after one of those markets. So that would be the idea. We just don't have time to go through all that, but certainly feel free to pick up those market reports. There's a lot more interesting stuff in there too. So at that point, I've actually done pretty well for time after getting through that. So I might just pause there a minute and see if there's anything you wanted me to go back to, because we've parked the melons, so Jonathan and I are going to chat offline about that. And then there's we kind of cantered through some of those other packs. So, but I'm happy to go back and answer any questions that anyone might have.
Hi, Patrick. It's Mila here.
Hey, Mila, how are you?
Yeah, great. Thank you. I missed the beginning and it's great to come in. I can see we've got a question in the chat from Robin Sherlock, who's with Safe Food in Queensland. And Robin, you're more than welcome to turn your microphone on and ask your question, but if not, I will. And Robin's question, Pat, is the concern and value regarding safety in olive oil potentially linked to concerns regarding food and fraud contamination with other lower quality oils and deodorizing agents?
That's a great question, and I suspect that is true. With the data doesn't. We didn't get into that detail here, but that's just the contribution that we're sort of looking for to augment this work, because I think that you're onto something there. I think there's something pure about olive oil. People kind of really trust it, and I think that came through in the data, which is, I trust its safety. So I think that people have that there's a sort of romanticism around olive oil and its origins originally. And Australian olive oil has a great reputation around the world in many of these geographies. So, once again, that brand Australia halo would carry through. And I think, using Australian olives, the data is showing that there's lots of opportunity there. So, good question.
Yeah, and Pat, Michael Southern, I'm assuming that's you, Michael, who's put the comment in there, who's from Australian Olives, has also commented that it's probably particularly compared with seed oils.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. And for those that aren't yet familiar with the depth of information that's in the packages or in the reports, you can see the slide that Pat's showing right now. That exists for all the markets, not just the 3 or 4 or 5 priority markets which are in the top right-hand segment. You've got the information for all the markets. So if you've got interest in a particular market, you can go and explore that market. Or if you're interested in your product compared with something else, so you might grow a tropical or grow more than one tropical, and you want to see how mangoes stack up against lychees, you can look at the information that way for each of the markets. It's just what we're trying to do in these sessions is give you Pat's insights of how to read the 2,000 plus pages of reporting, so you can go away and do it in an informed manner yourself. We've got time for questions if anyone wants to put their hand up or turn their microphone on or their camera on or put anything in the chat. We haven't got any questions coming. Has anyone sent any further questions through to you, Jade?
No, nothing's come through so far.
Okay. Great.
Well, good. I hope that people have clear how to read it. I imagine many of you have, and it sounds like you have. So, but please reach out to us if you have any further questions, because, there's lots in there, and I know it might take you time to get through. And that's not even going to the market reports, which are also, as Mila said, we cut that every which way by the commodities in each market, so you can see how all the other commodities stack up in a certain market. So that's a useful too. Yeah.
Thanks, Pat. We've had the question of when will the recording be available? Oh, Jade's already got it organised. It'll be up on our website tomorrow. Jade's already sent you the link to where you can access and apply for access to the reports. That's also the location of where these recordings go. And you can see some of the recordings, past recordings, if you're there and you want to deep dive into them. So. Helen's question is, why wasn't China included? Helen, I can answer that one really quickly, or Pat could jump in, but at the beginning of this study, the funding source is the ATMAC, which was a federal government grant scheme in response to when we had trade and market access issues with China. So the questions were driving the study at the beginning, which were, what were the markets other than China? So it was actually deliberately excluded because we were looking for the next lot of opportunities. Obviously, we would never assume that we would ignore China. China is 33% of our horticultural trade. It is a very important market for many of our crops, commodities, and the whole of the hort sector. So it's really important. What we're looking for in this study is looking at markets beyond China. So they were the reasons. So, Pat, you've probably got a better way of putting it. Thanks for the explanation.
No, that's precisely it. This was all about what can we do outside China. So yeah, intentionally left out. And yeah, that's kind of what we've shown here today.
Yeah, that's great. Any further questions, anyone? Would anyone like to put their hands up or jump on in, cameras on? I think you've wowed them again, Pat. And Given this is actually the last of our rollouts, we would really like to thank you, Patrick, Olivia, the Kantar team, for all of your hard work, for the many thousands of hours in the study, but also the many, many hours of rollout of this work that's produced these recordings, the time and that you've taken to answer the questions and give us the depth of understanding. And Olivia, all your quick answers on the side of what does the data mean or how am I misreading that figure? It's been very valuable. There is a richness of information in these reports that we are grateful for. We know that they will become things to discuss for years to come. So thank you very much for your hard work on this presentation. And it's not just us at Hort Innovation. We're very proud of this work, but we're also really excited all the different parts of the industries that are reading this reports, are using it to question their current studies, their other studies, their future intentions, and they're looking at how do these future geographies compare relative to each other. So thanks very much.
Great, pleasure.
Thanks, everybody. I think that's it, Jade. We're at a close? We're at a close.
Yeah, yeah. Yes.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Olivia.
Thanks.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks,
Big
Michael. Thanks, Jono. Thanks.